Hey guys, tonight we're travelling to a time of spice trades, stiff collars and silent suffering. A time when the sun never set on the British Empire, but somehow shade never reached the people under it. We're diving into colonial India, not the one with saris, spices and sepia-toned Instagram reels. No, the real one. The one where life was a daily marathon of heat stroke, humiliation, and hopeless bureaucracy. You probably wouldn't last till lunch. And even if you did, the lunch would give you dysentery. Before we dig into this imperial fever dream, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if historical discomfort helps you sleep. And if you're awake enough, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love seeing how insomnia manages to be a global unifier. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that authentic ceiling fan hum. And let's settle into tonight's slow descent through dust, sweat and empire. Congratulations! You've just woken up in British-ruled India, somewhere between 1885 and 1920. The good news, you're not dead. The bad news, you're not British. You open your eyes to a ceiling made of cracked plaster and colonial indifference. The fan above you isn't spinning. It is not even connected to anything. It's just there for aesthetic, like justice or shade. You're lying on a thin cotton mattress, which feels like it was filled with sand, thorns, and a personal grudge against your lower back. Or the air around you is hot, wet and heavy, like being licked by a monsoon with bad breath. Your name? Doesn't matter. They won't pronounce it right anyway. To the men in uniform, you're just another native. A blurred line on a census form, a tax burden with legs. If you're lucky, they'll mispronounce your name into something vaguely British. If you're unlucky, they'll skip the name entirely and refer to you as boy, regardless of your age, beard, or soul-crushing fatigue. You're probably male, not because things were easier for men, but because if you're a woman, this entire era becomes something else entirely. Hard mode, blindfolded, with both hands tied, and someone constantly calling you impure. You're also poor. Because statistically, in colonial India, that's the default setting. Roughly 90% of the population is locked into an economic caste system where social mobility is about as real as clean drinking water in a cholera ward. You weren't born into wealth or power. You were born into land tax, rice husks, and the slow realisation that your destiny was written by someone in a London office who's never seen heat waves or hunger up close. If you were hoping for a spiritual rebirth or reincarnation glow-up, surprise! You've been sent back as yourself, only now with less autonomy and more imperial surveillance. And no, you're not going to meet Gandhi today. He's busy writing letters to viceroys and being politely disruptive. You're too far down the chain. Your job is to survive until sundown without getting whipped, fined, conscripted, or spiritually obliterated. Let's take inventory. You own a dhoti or faded tunic that hasn't known soap since the famine, one pair of sandals, both missing parts of their soles and your dignity. A metal bowl with a chip that predates your memory. 3 teeth you trust, and a deep, aching suspicion that the gods are using you for character development you do not own. Land respect, clean water, the right to protest, or even a last name that registers as human to your colonial overseers. You're not a citizen. You're a subject. A very replaceable, very taxable subject of His Majesty's Empire. A crown you will never touch, except as the emblem on a bayonet. Outside your hut, And yes, it's a hut, because calling it a house would require walls that don't fall apart when you exhale. The world is already alive, not with joy, with heat, insects and bureaucracy. Chickens squawk in the dust. A cow stands directly in your path, as if daring you to believe in personal space. A British soldier walks past, sweating through his uniform, pretending not to see you. You're not invisible. You're just beneath notice. In your village, every caste knows its place, not by choice, by survival. You've been taught since birth to bow slightly when a landlord's assistant approaches, to say Sahib even when the man you're speaking to is younger than you, dumber than you, and carries a tiny moustache like it grants him divine rights. You speak your native language at home, but outside you mangle English just enough to not get beaten for insolence. It's not a second language, it's a shield. A flimsy one, riddled with holes, but better than nothing. You've never seen the inside of a British home. You've only seen the gates, tall, iron, and painted with a kind of authority that says, "Stay out," in 12 languages, including yours. The Sahib's bungalow has fans that work, servants who call them master, and tea that doesn't taste like river water, and regret. You've heard stories about Calcutta, or Bombay, places where trains run and people wear shoes indoors. You've also heard that those places are just more organised forms of suffering, like being flogged on schedule instead of randomly. If you're Hindu, you're navigating temple politics, food taboos, and constant suspicion. If you're Muslim, you're dodging both British disdain and the slow erosion of your rights. If you're from any other religion, congratulations. You're considered an exotic sidebar in someone else's imperial novel. A curiosity in a dispatch letter. You don't read the newspaper? You can't afford it. But even if you could, it wouldn't help. The news isn't written for you. It's written about you. And even then, only when something catches fire, gets looted, or inconveniences the East India Company. And yes, they're still here. The East India Company technically dissolved years ago, but its spirit lives on. In every ledger, in every tax, in every uniformed man who thinks the Ganges is quaint until it gives him dysentery. You're not free, but you're not enslaved either. You're in the worst possible category, administered. Managed by laws you didn't vote for. Watched by men you didn't elect. Punished by systems that don't see you as real. And no, you can't leave. You can't migrate. You can't apply for citizenship. You can't even walk 10 miles without papers, approval, or someone asking why your face looks suspiciously determined. So you stay. You swallow your dreams like spoiled lentils. You tighten your belt, not because of fashion, but because there's no food to fill it. And you begin your day. Because in colonial India, existing isn't living. It's endurance. And you step outside, if outside is the right word for the sun-blasted patch of ground where your hut ends and the world begins. The air hits you like a hot slap from an indifferent god. There's no breeze, no shade, just the same heat you've known since childhood. A thick, dusty pressure that settles in your chest and stays there like unspoken grief. You don't walk with purpose, you shuffle. Because purpose requires energy, and energy requires food. And food requires a harvest that wasn't stolen by taxes, drought, or a British rail line bisecting your rice field like colonial paper cut. Your feet are already filthy. The dirt isn't just dirt. It's decades of ashes, dung, and the footprints of men who came, ruled, extracted and left without saying goodbye. Children run past you barefoot. Not out of freedom, but because shoes are reserved for landlords, traders, and the occasional missionary who believes in both salvation and uncomfortable hats. There's a sound in the distance, a train. You don't look. Trains aren't for you. Trains are for goods, tea, cotton, opium. Trains are the veins of empire, pumping profit from your soil to a distant island where men in powdered wigs sip the very leaves your village picked and packed in silence. You've never been on one. You likely never will. The nearest station charges more for a ticket than your family earns in a month. And even if you could afford it, you wouldn't know where to go. Freedom isn't a destination on any timetable. Your village is quiet in the way that only overworked places are. The kind of silence that hums with exhaustion. You pass a woman squatting by the well, drawing water with a rope so frayed it looks like it's on its final life. Her hands are calloused. Her face is a map of sun damage, worry, and the kind of strength no empire has yet figured out how to exploit properly. She doesn't look at you. No one looks at anyone for too long here. Eye contact implies a future. Somewhere, someone coughs. The wet, thick kind of cough that means either tuberculosis or just another year of colonial administration. Your name is still your name, but the British wrote it down wrong in the land records. They replaced your father's name with an abbreviation. They turned your grandfather's village into a number. You exist, but only as a clerical error filed under native affairs. If you were to vanish tomorrow, your hut would be recycled, your debts absorbed, and your name mispronounced one final time by a bored junior officer. You head toward the landlord's house, not because you want to, but because the tax is due. It's always due. Even when the harvest fails. Even when the river floods. Even when the gods clearly declared a natural disaster by throwing snakes into your granary. The tax doesn't care. It's mathematical, precise, unrelenting, colonial. The landlord doesn't live here, of course. He lives in Calcutta, or maybe London. He owns the land, but not the soil. Not the blisters it creates. His agent handles things. A man who wears too much perfume and not enough humanity. You call him Babu, even though no one in the village likes him. He collects rent with the enthusiasm of a man who's never planted anything except suspicion. He'll be waiting. With his ledger. With his monocle. With his fake smile that stretches too far and reaches nowhere. And you? You're holding a bag of grain you needed to eat. A month's worth of calories, now repackaged as debt relief. You don't have a choice. If you don't pay, your name goes on a list. And being on that list means eviction, arrest, or worse, conscription into a railway crew, where men vanish faster than their own shadows in the sun. There's talk of rebellion, always. Quiet talk. Behind cooking fires and beneath banyan trees. Whispers about Swaraj and freedom, and one day. But you've learned not to listen. Hope is expensive. More expensive than salt, or grain, or a widow's last gold bangle. And right now you can't afford another dream. You remember your grandfather's stories, before the British came, before the company took control. He used to speak of a time when things were different. Not easier, just less curated, less watched. He was a boy when the mutiny happened, saw the smoke from a distance, heard the screams, knew the names of men who never came back. The British called it a rebellion. Your village called it a warning. After that, everything changed. Guns became sacred. Paper became law. And English became mandatory. At least if you wanted to work, plead, or beg with any effectiveness. Your language, still yours. but only useful for prayer, poetry, and shouting at buffalo. You reach the babu's compound, not a palace, but grand enough to make you feel like lint on his doormat. He doesn't greet you, just gestures toward the table. You hand him the grain. He weighs it, makes a note, and offers you the same fake smile you've seen since childhood. The one that says, "You may go, but don't forget who owns your sunrise." You bow slightly, not because you want to, but because standing upright too long in the presence of a man with paperwork is considered offensive. And as you turn to leave, you hear him mutter something in English, something dismissive. Maybe worthless, maybe typical. You don't respond. Your body walks away. But your pride, already tattered, gets left behind, stepped on like mud. Back on the path, you try not to think. Thinking leads to anger. Anger leads to speaking. Speaking leads to being overheard. And being overheard leads to, well, let's just say, there's a man in your village who once spoke too loudly about the collector's corruption. He hasn't been seen in 6 months. People say he joined the rebels. People also say his bones are in a ditch behind the police station. Either way, no one says his name anymore. Names are dangerous, so you walk, slowly, grainless, nameless, nationless. And the sun keeps climbing. You don't go home. You sit under the neem tree at the edge of the field. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's one of the few places where you're not immediately useful to someone else. No one's watching. No one's asking questions. For a moment, you're invisible, but this time on your own terms. You scratch at your ankle, a mosquito bite, or maybe a flea from the straw mat you call a bed. It doesn't matter. There are always more. Insects thrive in colonial India. So do fevers. So does bureaucracy. You close your eyes, trying to remember who you are. Not your name, yourself. The part of you that existed before you were weighed, taxed, surveyed, baptised in bureaucracy, and declared subhuman by a man in a linen suit. It's hard. Your memories are filtered through rules now. Even your childhood isn't yours. You can remember playing with marbles in the dust, sure, but only until a British patrol came through, and you were told to clear the road like a piece of debris with opinions. Even your religion, once sacred and personal, is now politicised, reduced to boxes on forms. Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, other. There's always an other, just in case someone doesn't fit neatly enough into the empire's filing cabinet. Festivals are tolerated but watched, processions shadowed by constables with sticks. Prayers echo under curfews, and every temple bell feels slightly louder, as if ringing not for the gods, but in defiance of the ones who wear badges. Language is another battlefield. At home, you speak your mother tongue, but in the market, in the courtroom, at the school your cousin attends, where the teachers wear khaki and the alphabet sounds like swallowing rocks, English reigns. You've learned just enough to say, "Yes, Sahib," and "Sorry, Sahib," and "Please don't, Sahib." The rest, the poetry, the stories, the nuance, has no currency here. You were never taught to read your own script. Your name, if written in ink, appears foreign to your own eyes. A cruel trick of imperialism, making you illiterate in your own language while punishing you for not knowing theirs. And then there's your skin. You used to think it was just skin. Brown like the soil. Brown like your mother's hands. Brown like the tea they drink, but refuse to acknowledge where it came from. But now it's a label, a warning, an automatic excuse to question your worth. Your skin means you can be stopped in the street. It means your word weighs less in court. It means your pain is seen as normal and your joy as suspicious. You're not oppressed with chains. You're oppressed with systems, with silence, with paperwork and permits and a slow grinding erosion of everything that once felt like selfhood. The colonizer doesn't erase you all at once. He erases you daily, in inches, in rules, in looks that say, you should be grateful we let you live like this. And you are grateful sometimes, not for them, for what remains. You're grateful when the monsoon finally breaks and your roof holds, when your child doesn't cough blood for a whole week, when you go a day without anyone calling you a dog in a language that was forced on you. Somewhere, your uncle works on the rail lines. He sends letters, misspelled, barely readable, but filled with enough stubbornness to light a lantern. He says things are changing, that people are organising, that there are men in suits who speak against the crown, that crowds gather to listen to names like Nehru and Patel and Bose, that some British men, a few, not many, are starting to question the script they were handed at officer school. But here, in your village, those changes haven't arrived. Not yet. Here, the only things that arrive consistently are taxes, typhoid, and the occasional missionary pamphlet about the virtues of Christian obedience. You once met a missionary? Pale, sweaty, smiling in the way people do when they're scared of everyone around them, but determined to feel superior anyway. He gave you a Bible in English. You used the pages to wrap tobacco. Not out of protest, out of utility. Paper is expensive. Religion is everywhere. But tobacco waits for no one. He told you Jesus loved you. You smiled politely and wondered if Jesus had ever been sunburnt while hauling buckets from a poisoned well. You didn't say that, of course. You nodded. Because smiling and nodding are your best tools, second only to silence. You think of the man who keeps records in the town, British educated, wears a tie even in 40 Celsius heat. He speaks English like it's a sword, crisp, controlled, cutting. He was born here like you, brown like you, but when he looks at you, it's with a mixture of pity and panic. Like you're a reminder of a life he escaped, but still smells faintly of. He's not your enemy, but he's not your ally either. He's what the Empire creates when it wins. Not soldiers, but simulations. Brown skin, white rules, and just enough guilt to drink tea without tasting the blood in it. You've learned not to envy. Envy is a luxury. You focus on function. You eat when you can. Work when you must. Sleep when the heat and the insects allow. Dream if possible, but not too loudly. Your grandfather used to tell you, a silent mouth lives longer. He also died in a famine, so you've learned to take proverbs with some salt, assuming you can find any that hasn't been taxed. And still there's pride, not the parade kind, not the shouting in the streets kind. The quiet kind. The kind you whisper to yourself while walking back to your hut with empty hands and an unbroken spine. You made it through another day of being seen, but not acknowledged. Taxed, but not represented. Watched, but never heard. You're not a slave, but you are not free. You are not invisible, but you are not seen. You are not defeated, but you are always, always resisting. In the smallest, most exhausting ways. In your language, in your posture, in the way you look back at a British officer just half a second too long, in the way you say your name to yourself at night, over and over, like a prayer against paperwork and forgetting. Because in colonial India, identity isn't something you're born with. It's something you refuse to give up. You don't breathe the air in colonial India. You chew it. It doesn't enter your lungs like oxygen. It slinks in like something that wants to colonize you. Hot, sticky, and eternally dusty. The kind of air that sits heavy on your chest and makes you question whether your ancestors made a bet with the gods and lost. It's not clean. Nothing is clean. The British build waterworks for themselves, not for you. Your well is shared with 50 people, 3 goats, and a wandering dog that drinks from it more confidently than you do. Every sip you take feels like playing dice with dysentery, but you drink it anyway. Not because you're brave, but because thirst has no standards. The dust is always there. It doesn't matter if you're in a village or a town, in a hut or under a banyan tree. It coats your clothes. It lines your nostrils. It clings to your hair like ancestral trauma. You wash your face in the morning, and by midday you look like you crawled through a grain sack filled with ash. The dust isn't just physical, it's spiritual. A symbol. A texture of empire. The British don't mind the dust, because they don't live in it. Their compounds are swept clean by servants who cough quietly behind handkerchiefs. Their gardens are watered twice a day, even if the village next door is rationing drinking water. They sit on verandas in wicker chairs, sipping gin and tonics to stave off malaria, while your uncle gets fever dreams and dies quietly under a neem tree because quinine costs more than his body weight. And the heat. Dear gods, the heat. There's no mercy in colonial heat. It arrives early, stays late, and ruins everything it touches. Shade is a myth. Fans exist, but not for you. You've seen them. Slow, lazy fans swinging above colonial desks, powered by ropes and a sweating servant in the next room pulling rhythmically, like he's rowing a boat to nowhere. You, on the other hand, have sweat, and a handkerchief that's been washed so many times it now functions more as a symbolic gesture. You sweat through your tunic by breakfast. By noon, your entire body feels like it's been dipped in sticky rice and rolled in pepper dust. You can't think clearly. You can't breathe deeply. You just exist, in the same way a candle exists in a furnace. And then come the monsoons. It should be a relief. Rain, finally. Cool water, nourishment for the soil. The soft kiss of sky tears on a parched earth. No, it's war. The sky doesn't weep. It attacks. Thunder rolls like divine warning. And then the flood comes. Sudden, sharp, and mean. Your roof, a thatched hope held together with twine and memory, immediately caves in. Your floor, once dust, is now mud. Your belongings float, not away, just around, as if mocking your attachment to material things. Chickens scream. Children scream louder. You scream internally, because doing it out loud will only make the mosquitoes find you faster. Your hut floods. Your neighbour's hut floods. The school floods. The temple floods. The only thing that doesn't flood is the collector's bungalow, because it's built on a hill above your suffering, with drainage channels as smug as the man who approved them. Disease thrives in this slush. Typhoid, cholera, malaria. They don't knock. They walk in like colonial officers with a warrant and an attitude. You know the signs. The chills, the vomiting, the way someone goes from fine to funeral in 36 hours. Your cousin got sick last year. The village priest said it was the wrath of the gods. The British doctor said it was native hygiene. Neither helped. You buried him in a hole that filled with water 5 minutes later. Even when it's dry, the environment tries to kill you in subtler ways. The roads aren't paved, not for you. They're dusty in summer, swampy in monsoon, and filled with rocks shaped specifically to find the softest part of your barefoot sole. Ox carts lurch over them. Women carry water jugs across them. And if you fall, no one stops. Not out of cruelty, out of exhaustion. Everyone's on the same clock. Survive or surrender. And the railways are the pride of the empire. Civilization, they say. Progress. But they're not for you. You watch the trains pass like comets. Loud, fast, and completely indifferent to your presence. They connect cities you've never seen, carrying goods you'll never afford, managed by men who don't know your name, and wouldn't pronounce it right if they did. You've seen men build the tracks. Dark, wiry, barefoot men, hauling iron like it's wood, and being shouted at in 4 languages. They don't look up when the trains pass. Maybe they're hoping the Empire forgets them long enough to let them live. Even nature, once sacred, now feels regulated. You used to go into the forest for firewood. Now it's protected land, protected from you. Your grandmother got fined last year for picking mangoes from a tree that technically belonged to the crown. A mango tree. The same one her grandmother planted. But now it's part of a government forest reserve. You're allowed to look at it, but not benefit from it. Colonialism, after all, is mostly about permission. Every part of your physical world is now a trap. The land, taxed, the rivers, polluted, the forests, restricted, the sky, mood swinging between arid cruelty and flood. Even your own body betrays you. Heat rash, worms, blisters, a persistent cough that might be from smoke or dust or slow spiritual disintegration. Who knows? You've heard the term white man's burden. You're living proof that it was never about helping anyone. You're the footnote to their burden, the smudged ink in their imperial poem. And the worst part? You've internalized it. You apologize for the smell of your hut, even though it's the only shelter you have. You lower your voice when speaking to a clerk with polished boots. You call men Sahib, who barely deserve the title of sentient. Not because you want to, because this is survival now. Not just of the body, of dignity. At night, the air cools slightly. But the fear doesn't. Snakes come out, rats, scorpions. Your bed is a lottery ticket. Maybe you'll sleep. Maybe you'll wake up with something venomous curled next to your ribs. You sleep lightly. Not out of paranoia. Out of experience. The British sleep well. In rooms with mosquito nets, with guards, with ice boxes and quinine, and whiskey, and fans powered by other people's suffering. They don't hear the sounds outside. Crickets, distant drums, a dog howling like it knows the end of something. You hear everything, because your body is tuned to danger. And your soul, what's left of it, is tired. Not just from labour, from existing in a world that treats you as both essential and expendable. You used to think the land was yours. Now you're told it belongs to a company, a queen, a crown, a system. You work it. You bleed into it. You bury your dead in it. But it was never yours. In colonial India, the environment doesn't support life. It judges it. Constantly. And your sentence is to keep breathing anyway. The empire likes to brag about the railways. It shows them off like a badge of honour in every policy paper, school book, and drunken bar rant in London. We brought civilization, they say. We gave them transport. We connected the nation. But the only thing the railways connect for you is despair to export. You've seen the tracks cut through rice paddies, fields, villages, carving clean, straight lines where once there were homes, trees, and paths worn down by generations of barefoot families. The trains don't stop here. Why would they? This is a village of labourers, not cargo. The train doesn't carry your people. It carries the things your people harvest, mine, or die producing. Cotton. Salt. Opium, sometimes soldiers. You've watched the trains go by, watched them blur into smoke and thunder, watched the children wave even when they shouldn't, because there's something hypnotic about machinery that doesn't care whether you live or die. At least it's moving. Your road, on the other hand, doesn't move. It's not even a road, just a path. In the dry season, it's cracked like old skin. In the monsoon, it turns to sludge. Cart wheels sink. Ankles twist. You once lost a sandal in it and never found it again. You just left it there, like an offering to whatever local spirit governs colonial infrastructure. The British engineer once visited. He arrived in a cart with 2 bullocks, a leather hat, and an expression of mild disgust. He walked around with a notebook, measuring distances, asking about soil firmness, asking villagers to show him where the land flooded. You thought maybe he'd fix something. Instead, they built a drainage canal that starts in your village and ends directly behind the collector's bungalow. Congratulations. You now live upstream of privilege. The canal smells like regret and old fish. Children are warned not to go near it. They do anyway. 2 drowned last year. Their mothers wailed. The engineer filed a report. But if you follow the canal far enough, you'll find something worse. The salt pans. A glimmering white wasteland under the sun, beautiful from a distance, toxic up close. Salt that leaches into your skin, salt that flakes into your eyes, salt that sticks in your hair and makes you cough blood after too many weeks of employment. You tried working there once. You lasted 2 days. On the 3rd you fainted, woke up with a cracked lip, a sunburn, and the taste of your own body failing to adapt. You never went back. Others still do, not because they want to, because it pays just enough to survive. Not live, just survive. 1 week at a time, 1 blister at a time. The environment is not your home anymore, it's your rival. And sometimes it feels like it's lost patience. The river floods in spring. Not gracefully, not with poetic mist or soft whispers of abundance. It breaks its banks with all the fury of a civilization denied. Mud rushes through homes, carrying cookware, dried lentils, even an entire fence once. You build everything again. Because what else can you do? File a complaint. You've seen what colonial complaints look like. A form, in triplicate, filed in English, reviewed by a man who drinks his tea with 1 sugar cube and no comprehension of poverty. He stamps it, passes it on. Nothing happens. The river doesn't read, it just returns every year, as regular as taxes and twice as destructive. And then there's the forests. Once they were sacred, filled with stories, spirits, and old trees that watched over your ancestors. Now, they're government property, marked, catalogued, enclosed. You used to gather firewood. You'd take only what had fallen, dead branches, dry twigs. You thought it was fair. The British disagreed. Now there are fines, patrols. You know someone who was beaten for taking bark to use as medicine. You know someone else who was jailed for unauthorised grazing. And once, long ago, your uncle was shot at. Not hit, just warned. The warning worked. Now you don't enter the forest. You walk around it, like it's cursed. Which, in a way, it is. Not by gods, by regulations. The British call it conservation. You call it exile. You look at the trees from a distance. They wave in the wind, like they remember you. But they can't help you now. They belong to the Empire. Even the animals have been colonised. The British love shikar, hunting, They ride out with rifles and gin bottles, shoot tigers, pose with them, turn the skins into rugs, and send photos back home. You're told to celebrate it. You're told that the man who just wiped out 3 elephants in a single afternoon is a hero. You know better. You know what happens when the big cats vanish. The deer population explodes. They eat your crops. You go hungry. But when you complain, you're told it's a natural cycle. As if your starvation is just a quirk of the food chain. There's a drought now. Or maybe it's a flood. At this point, the seasons are indistinguishable. And the only constants are suffering and bureaucracy. Your fields, once proud, once poetic, now look like abandoned theatre sets. Cracked earth, wilted stalks. A scarecrow so pathetic, even the crows have started nesting in its chest. And when the inspector visits, he frowns, makes a note and says, "Perhaps next year will be better." You want to tell him there might not be a next year, that your sister is coughing up water from the last fever, that your youngest son hasn't eaten in 2 days, that the cow died last week from heat stroke, and was buried in a shallow grave with more ceremony than any of your uncles. But you don't say anything. You nod. Because in colonial India, complaining is performance art. It entertains the ruling class, changes nothing, and might get you arrested if the audience is in a bad mood. So you keep walking, past the broken roads, past the forbidden forests, past the salt pans, the flooded drains, the poisoned wells, and you marvel, quietly, bitterly, at how much effort it takes to maintain a world so hostile to human life, not by accident, but by design. The strange thing is, this land used to be sacred, not in the abstract, not in the painted on a calendar kind of way, but real, personal. You used to whisper to it. Your ancestors did. They knew which tree gave shade at noon, which patch of soil needed rest after harvest, which stream to trust when the others ran dry. You believed in it. You belonged to it. Now, it belongs to the survey office. The land has been mapped, measured, renamed, taxed, and sold. Sometimes back to you, if you can afford to lease what was once your grandfather's inheritance. If you dig too deep, it's trespassing. If you dig too shallow, it's failure. Either way, there's a fine. And if you can't pay the fine, there's prison. And if you can't afford prison, well, that's what the labour camps are for. The fields don't look like postcards. They look like warnings. Bent stalks. Starved roots. Soil so dry it coughs when the wind passes over it. There's no fertiliser. Not unless you count old cow dung and your own diminishing optimism. There's no irrigation, just rain when it comes. And when it doesn't, you pray harder. Not because you believe the gods are listening, but because you've run out of other ideas. You used to know what season it was by the smell of the earth. Now you know by what's missing. When mangoes don't arrive, it's summer. When nothing grows at all, it's the new normal. And yet, the tax collector comes on time. Always. He doesn't care about rainfall, or disease, or God's mood. He has a quota, a chart, a form to fill. He arrives on a horse if he's trying to impress, a cart if he's trying to intimidate, a bicycle if he's behind on his own debts. He asks how your harvest was. He smiles. You lie. He knows you're lying. You both perform. He marks a number. You hand over grain, or money, or the gold nose ring that was your mother's. Then he leaves, whistling. You stay with the earth. Some days you think maybe you're imagining it, the hostility. Maybe the sun wasn't always this angry. Maybe the floods didn't used to come this early. Maybe the land didn't always crack open like it's trying to bury you. Maybe this is just a bad year. One bad year after another, forming a polite, continuous apocalypse. But it's not just nature. It's buildings. It's fences. It's the new canal that redirected the stream away from your field and into a tea estate owned by a man named Mr. Hutchins, who once called your village picturesque, and then wrote a column about how the local labourers were too proud to work for fair wages. It's the telegraph line that cut through the banyan grove where your uncle used to tell stories. It's the railway that split your cousin's farm in half and made one side infertile from constant smoke and vibration. It's the new British school that requires shoes to enter, even though half the village can't afford rice. It's the entire landscape being slowly retranslated into a language that doesn't need you to survive, only to obey. You think about the animals. They're confused, too. The cows no longer know where to graze. All the good grass is fenced in or poisoned by drainage. The dogs have become nocturnal. They bark at the moon, or at the trains, or at nothing. Even the birds seem less confident. You used to wake to their songs. Now you wake to silence, followed by coughing, followed by the sharp bark of a constable telling someone to move their cart off the main road. You want to run away sometimes, into the forest, into the hills, to a place where the sun hasn't memorized your suffering, but you won't, because there's nowhere to go. The British own the city. The landlords own the land. The forests are sealed. The rivers are unsafe. The roads are worse. The only thing you truly own is your body, and even that feels least. You carry it through this climate like a bundle of bad luck. Every muscle aches. Every joint predicts the weather. Your skin, scorched, bitten, peeled, healed, then scorched again, has the consistency of old parchment. Your back is a map of every season that betrayed you. And when you lie down at night, it's not to rest, it's to pause, because rest implies recovery. And there is no recovery here. Not in this village, not in this time, not in this weather. The British officer sleeps soundly. You know this. You've seen the servants carry the punkahs, the giant fans swinging back and forth above his bed, like the Empire's own lullaby. He wakes to tea served on a tray. You wake to a mosquito in your ear and the smell of your neighbour's child vomiting into the drainage ditch. You wonder what it's like to walk through this same land and not feel watched by it, not feel owned, to step into the sunlight without flinching, because it doesn't mean hunger, to see a hill and not think, will that be taxed next? You'll never know, and neither will your children, unless something changes, unless someone forces it, unless the land, somehow, remembers who you were. But for now, you bow your head to the sun, to the dust, to the bureaucracy, to the gods, to the empire. Because in colonial India, the environment isn't a backdrop. It's a weapon. An existence? It's just a slow art of ducking. You wake up before dawn, but not because you're an early riser. You wake up because you never really slept. The night was long, wet, and loud. The usual symphony of coughing children, barking dogs, and your neighbour snoring like a dying harmonium. There is no mattress, just a cotton mat thinner than your patience. There is no blanket, just humidity clinging to your skin like guilt. And there is no alarm, just the birds screaming, the cows grumbling, and your back quietly submitting its letter of resignation. This is not a day off. There is no such thing. You sit up, spine cracking, head pounding, already sweating. Outside, the sun is still deciding whether to rise, probably negotiating the terms with a nearby cloud. But you don't get to wait. Time in colonial India is not yours. It belongs to the landowner, or the foreman, or the officer, or someone with a moustache and a pen. You rise because hunger doesn't pause, because debt doesn't nap, because if you don't work, your family eats less, and they already eat like monks on punishment. You pull on your clothes, if they can still be called that, a torn dhoti, stained shirt, and sandals that are more philosophy than footwear. You grab your tool, a rusty sickle, or maybe a hoe so warped it now qualifies as abstract art, and you begin walking to the field. You don't own this field. Your name isn't on any document. Your family has worked this same patch for generations, but all it takes is one ink blot on one land deed in one office for that to end. The land belongs to a zamindar, a man who may live 3 towns away or 3 countries. His representative, a man with soft hands and a hard stare, collects the rent, never early, never late, like a tax-collecting ghost in leather sandals. You plough at a wooden yoke tied to a pair of oxen who look more tired than you. The soil is dry. It resists your blade like it resents your touch. Every swing feels like arguing with the earth. Every furrow a negotiation that always ends with you giving more than you have. You plant seeds, knowing full well that only half will sprout, and even then, only if the rain remembers it's part of the deal. Sometimes you work under the sun until you hallucinate shade. Sometimes you work in the rain until your skin starts growing moss. Sometimes you work through a fever, because if you stop, the field doesn't care, and neither does the man who collects your share. If you're lucky, you get a 10-minute break. You sit under the same neem tree that saw your father work, and his father, and his. The bark is peeling, like your faith. You sip water from a brass vessel that hasn't been properly cleaned since Diwali. You eat a lump of rice with a smear of salt, assuming there's salt this week. And then you go back to it. Swing, lift, dig, repeat, until your fingers go numb, until your knees start auditioning for a future injury, until the sun disappears behind the same cloud it was arguing with this morning. If you're not in agriculture, your job isn't easier. Maybe you're a weaver. Congratulations. You now sit for 12 hours a day on a mat hunched over a loom made from recycled furniture, producing fine cotton cloth that gets stamped, stacked, and sent to men who will sell it in shops with waxed floors and piano music. Your eyes blur. Your fingers bleed. And if the inspector finds a flaw in your thread count, your pay is docked. You used to sell your own cloth. You used to be part of a guild, a market, a local economy. Now, the British decided your loom was competition, so they flooded your town with Manchester milled textiles, cheaper than dust, and told you to adapt. You adapted. You accepted less money. You worked longer hours. You sold your dignity thread by thread. Or maybe you work in construction, helping build colonial bungalows and railways and churches. You carry bricks on your head, mix lime with bare hands, sleep beside the same wall you built. If you fall from scaffolding, there is no compensation, no inquiry, just a nod from the foreman and another man pulled from the crowd to take your place. One body down, one body in. The system is never short on bodies. There's always work, but there's never income, only survival. Even women work, everywhere, always. Not because it's progressive, but because it's necessary. They fetch water, cook, clean, patch roofs, patch wounds, patch lives. They work in the fields too, and spin thread, and raise children, and bury children. Their labour is unpaid, unrecorded, and unending. If you're a child, you don't get to play. You carry water. You scare birds from crops. You clean ash. You learn how to serve tea before you learn how to write your name. Assuming anyone bothers to teach you your name. There is no education. Only employment. There is no retirement. Only death. Sometimes, men are hired to carry British officers in palkis, palanquins. Grown men, barefoot, lifting another man through a city like he's too sacred to touch the road. The British call it tradition. You call it torment with a cultural discount. You've seen your friend collapse after 4 hours of walking with a pale man on his back, mumbling about heat and casually asking if the locals always smell this earthy. He was replaced in 10 minutes. No questions, no thanks. Just sweat, just motion, just empire, carried literally on someone else's shoulders. If you ever get paid, it's in coins so worn they look like they've been apologising for years. If you're paid in grain, you eat half, save a quarter, and watch the rest get eaten by rats. You can't save, you can't plan, you can't stop. Labour in colonial India isn't seasonal, it's terminal. There's no such thing as having a bad day. That phrase assumes you're allowed to have good ones. Here, the best you can hope for is not awful. A day when no one shouts, no tools break, no one dies, and no British man uses your name like a challenge. There are strikes sometimes, revolts, whispered rebellions in the factories. You hear of mill workers demanding better hours, indigo farmers refusing to grow for British traders. You hear about unions forming and the police breaking them with batons and prison sentences. You wonder what would happen if you stopped. If you just stopped, dropped your tool, sat in the field, refused to move, and then you remember the man who tried that. He hasn't been seen in 2 years. They said he was a revolutionary. They also said he was delusional. The only revolution that matters in your life is the one your body performs every morning, from sleep to struggle. And the only reward is that you get to do it again tomorrow. Let's say, for argument's sake, you don't work in the fields. You're one of the fortunate ones. You got a job in town, in a factory. That's what they call it. Factory. The word sounds important, industrial, like something new and forward-looking. But once you walk in, it stops being a place and becomes a sentence. You enter through a gate taller than your house. Inside, the air is heavy, not just with dust, but with the noise. Machines don't hum. They scream. Metallic clanks, rhythmic thuds, the occasional snap of something breaking that might be a part or a hand. You can't hear yourself think. Maybe that's the point. Your job is small, repetitive, mind-erasing. You spin, you press, you lift. You do the same motion hundreds of times a day until your arms forget they have joints and your brain forgets it was born for more than compliance. There's no safety gear, no gloves, no boots, no helmet. Only a kerchief to wipe your brow and a prayer that the machine doesn't grab your sleeve and pull you into a future without fingers. Your shift starts before sunrise and ends sometime after your soul does. There are no breaks. If you need to relieve yourself, you do it in a corner, under the scornful eye of a foreman who thinks dignity is a British luxury. Water is allowed once, in the afternoon. Warm. Tastes like rust and last month's resentment. There are boys here, younger than your cousin, barely tall enough to reach the spindles. They work the same hours, make the same pittance, breathe the same poison. Their fingers are small, perfect for getting inside gears to dislodge jammed fibres. You once saw one slip, heard the scream, watched a man rush over with a rag and a shrug. The boy came back the next day, missing 2 fingertips and any illusion of escape. The manager is British, of course. His job is to pace, inspect, sip tea. Sometimes he shouts. Not because something's wrong, but because it's expected. Authority here is measured in decibels. He speaks in clipped tones, throws around words like productivity and discipline as if they're tools or weapons. You're not sure he knows the difference. He never touches the machines. He just writes about them. You touch them all day, and they touch back, with heat, with vibration, with micro injuries that pile up like unpaid debt. The factory smells like grease, old oil, an ambition that died in a corner and nobody noticed. You walk home after dark, not because it's peaceful, because it's unavoidable. The road is long, unlit, and lined with shadows that may be trees or thieves, or just your own fatigue following you. You pass homes with shuttered windows, oil lamps flickering, the sound of tired people pretending they aren't about to wake up and do it all again. You don't eat dinner. You drink tea. Strong, bitter, mostly sugar. It fools your stomach for an hour. Then you lie down. Not to rest, to reboot, so that your body can go back to being useful again in 6 hours. If you're not in a factory, maybe you work the docks. You haul crates filled with goods you'll never touch as a customer. Tea, spices, cotton, opium, always opium. You load it onto ships bound for London, or Shanghai, or some city whose name you can't spell, but whose demands you serve like a ghost with calluses. The crates are heavy. Your spine is unreliable. Your pay depends on speed. No breaks, no rest. Just cargo, 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 until your sweat smells like someone else's profit. The British don't carry, they direct. Their boots are polished. Yours are fictional. They have lunch under a canopy. You eat standing up behind a warehouse while rats fight over what's left of your chapati. And don't complain. You've seen what happens to dock workers who speak up. They vanish, not dramatically, just slowly. Fewer shifts, less pay, more inspections. Then one day, their name disappears from the list and everyone else pretends they never existed. Because the docks aren't a job. They're a test. And the only thing you're being tested on is how long you can stay silent. Let's talk about famine. Not the abstract kind. Not the kind you read about in history books that says crop failure like it was a sad accident. No, this is the manufactured kind. The policy kind. The kind where grain is extracted from starving provinces and exported to feed soldiers and stockpiles, while people eat boiled leaves and scrape bark for flavour. You've seen it. Stomachs distended, eyes sunken. The kind of hunger that rewires your brain to forget names, morals, entire languages. Mothers selling jewellery for a handful of rice. Fathers walking for miles with a sack that once held food, but now just holds the weight of not being able to provide. There's a grain depot nearby, British guarded, full of wheat, full of flour, full of the solution. You're not allowed in, because famine here is not a lack of food, it's a lack of permission. You remember the man who snuck in? Just wanted to grab a sack for his family. He didn't make it out, shot twice. They said it was to deter others. It worked. You've never been deterred so efficiently in your life. So you watched a famine happen from across the road, and then there's the plague. You've heard whispers. Bombay is locked down. Cholera in the east. Malaria crawling through the villages. You wait for the knock. Not of medicine, of inspection. British officials arriving in carriages with gloves and disinfectants, rounding up people suspected of infection, hauling them to hospitals that are more holding pens than healing spaces. You don't get treated, you get catalogued, and if you die, your body is buried in a pit with lime. No ceremony, no name, no record, except maybe a mark in some government ledger that says native male, estimated age, poor. You don't fear death. You fear being forgotten before you even stop breathing. Work doesn't pause for plague or famine or fever. You still show up, limping, coughing, whispering apologies to your body that it no longer listens to. Because absence means dismissal, and dismissal means starvation. And starvation, well, you're already familiar. This is your work-life balance. You work until you collapse, then you balance the bruises. And if by some miracle you reach an age where you can't work anymore, your hands too twisted, your lungs too cracked, your legs too fragile, you don't retire. You disappear. Your children inherit the debt, the field, the loom, the same sickle and the same silence. And the empire rolls on, because in colonial India, labour doesn't just consume your time, it consumes your bloodline. There is no rest day. The calendar says there are festivals, holidays, sacred days of rest. But those are just names on paper. Days where the noise changes shape. From hammers to drums, from factory whistles to temple bells. But the weight never leaves your shoulders. You still carry water. You still cook. You still answer when called. Even on holy days, labour lingers. You sweep, mend, fetch and bow. You don't pause, you perform. Sundays exist, but not for you. They exist for the rail clerks, the officers, the missionaries, for the men with collars and ink-stained fingers who need a day off from giving orders. You don't give orders, you receive them through gestures, glances, or the unspoken pressure of watching someone hungrier than you waiting in line for your job. And yet, somehow, your labour is invisible. You're not a craftsman, you're not an entrepreneur, you're not even a labourer on paper. Your native assistance, rural contribution, a footnote in the appendix of someone else's report to the Crown. They write reports about your rice output and cotton yields. They do not write about your knees buckling in a flooded paddy, or the way your hands seize up in the cold after 12 straight hours at a loom. Your pain is not recorded. Your effort is not archived. Your dreams are not printable. Sometimes a British officer visits, a site inspection. He walks through the factory or the field, nodding at the productivity around him. You watch his boots avoid the mud your feet are buried in. He says words like progress and civilizing mission with the confidence of a man who's never been forced to sell his mother's sari to pay a harvest tax. He doesn't look at you. Not really. You're not scenery, but you're not a person either. You're part of the mechanism, like the oxen, like the wheelbarrow, like the floorboard that creaks but hasn't cracked yet. He signs his forms, leaves in a cart. You keep working, because the cart doesn't carry you. If you're a woman, the work never ends. You rise before the sun, tend the stove, clean the floor, feed the family, patch the thatch, walk 2 miles for water, return with a vessel balanced on your skull and a baby on your hip, all before breakfast. You spin thread, chop vegetables, smear cow dung on the walls for insulation, and attend births with the same hands you use to bury the dead. You have no title, no wage, no retirement, no recognition. You are not employed, you are expected. If you fall sick, someone says she's resting. What they mean is she's collapsed, What they don't say is, she'll get up anyway. If you're widowed, work increases. If you're childless, you're suspicious. If you speak too much, you're dangerous. If you're silent, you're obedient. But either way, you're expected to work until your wrists become rumours and your breath becomes background noise. And if you're old, you fade, not dramatically, just in increments. Your tasks shrink, but never disappear. You become the one who watches the fire, who holds the baby, who sharpens the blade, who tells the stories that no one listens to anymore. You exist like a candle, steady, flickering, then gone. And someone else takes your place at the loom, at the stove, at the plough. A nephew, a daughter, a cousin who still believes life is something you can shape if you work hard enough. You don't correct them. Hope is a precious lie, and they'll lose it soon enough. And when you finally can't go on, when your back says no, your fingers can't close, your eyes blur with more than just sweat, there is no pension. There is no farewell. There is just a mat in a corner, a few quiet glances, and a bowl of rice that someone else had to earn. You think sometimes about stopping completely, walking away. Not into a city, and not into a protest, not into anything romantic, just out, into the forest, into the hills, to a place where no one needs anything from you except your absence. But you never go, because there are mouths to feed, because debt doesn't disappear just because you do, because you're afraid that if you vanish, even the memory of you will dissolve like sugar in the canal water. So you stay, and you keep moving. Labour is no longer what you do, it's what you are. You labour when you cook, when you carry, when you listen. You labour when you pray. You labour when you sleep. You labour when you love. Because affection too must be managed, squeezed in between chores, rationed like salt, hidden like secrets. You have no time for romance, only companionship, only survival in pairs. You marry not for joy, but for shared struggle. 2 incomes, 2 backs, 2 bodies that will age into broken furniture in the same room. And even intimacy is work. You know this. Everyone knows this. But no one says it out loud. There's no time. The whistle blows, the bell rings, the priest calls, the sun climbs, the overseer shouts, the customer arrives, the loom creaks, the sweat returns. And you keep going, because if you don't, someone else will. And the empire, it always finds replacements. In colonial India, society isn't built, it's stacked. Neatly, rigidly, oppressively. Like someone took a pyramid, flipped it upside down, and asked you to hold it up with your face. There's a place for everyone, that's what they say, but you already know what that means. Place is code. A polite way of reminding you that you were born somewhere near the bottom, probably barefoot, definitely brown, and always one step away from being reminded of it. At the top are the British. Not many, just enough. Like mould in a damp kitchen. Small in number, but strategically placed to ruin everything. They walk differently. Not faster, not stronger. Just with the weightlessness of men who've never carried anything heavier than authority. Their clothes are lighter too. Starched white linen, pith helmets, boots that never touch actual mud. They wear time like a privilege. You wear it like a punishment. They don't shout much. They don't have to. The shouting is delegated. That's where the clerks come in. The barbus, the intermediaries, the brown men in khaki who speak English and enforce Englishness like they invented it. Their handwriting is perfect. Their shoes are polished. Their superiority is recent, insecure, and therefore ferocious. They're not British. but they wear the system like a second skin. You can't talk to them without feeling like you missed an exam you weren't invited to. One of them lives near your village. He used to be a weaver's son. Now he manages records, births, deaths, taxes, land deeds. He never smiles. He squints like your present is a math problem he's annoyed to solve. He doesn't remember your name, just the number assigned to your field, your hut, your status. He asks if you've paid your dues. He doesn't ask if you're still breathing. You bow when you see him, even though he's shorter than you, even though he once borrowed your father's bullock cart, even though you once carried him home when he passed out from too much sweet toddy. You bow anyway, because now he holds a pen, and in colonial India, the pen is not mightier than the sword. It is the sword. Above him sits the zamindar, the landlord, a man who has never ploughed a field, but owns thousands of them. He speaks your language, but not like you. His version is cleaner, thinner, less burdened by reality. He lives in a haveli with thick walls and high windows, not to keep the heat out, but to keep the people out. His food arrives in brass trays. Yours arrives after a long negotiation with your stomach and the weather. You see him maybe twice a year. Once during tax season. Once during festival season, when he sits on a wooden throne and throws coins at children like he's feeding pigeons. Everyone claps. You clap too. Not because you want to, because everyone else is watching. If you don't clap, someone will notice. And if someone notices, someone will report, because below the landlords and clerks are the constables, the police, not the kind with sirens and badges, the kind with sticks and smirks, the kind who walk like they've just won something and are still deciding who to punish for it. They carry lathis, wooden batons curved from years of disciplining people who don't speak English fast enough. They don't ask questions, they ask for bribes. If you pay, you're guilty but free. If you don't, you're innocent but arrested. Either way you lose. They wear uniforms, not for protection, for theatre. A constable once came to your village looking for a thief. He left with someone's son, someone's wristwatch, and 3 days' worth of rice. No one protested. Protesting would mean forming thoughts, speaking them, risking a knock on the door at midnight. The hierarchy is enforced not with violence, but with the promise of it. And you live under that promise. Every day. Even religion doesn't save you. In theory, the temple is neutral ground. In practice, it's a caste census with incense. You know where you can sit, where you must not walk, which part of the well you can touch, which priest will give you a glance, and which will look through you like your fog on his glasses. If you're from a lower caste, you enter after others leave. You speak softly. You wash your hands twice. And if you make a mistake, step in the wrong direction, breathe in the wrong rhythm, you're polluting the space. And you're reminded of it publicly, sometimes with a curse, sometimes with a slap. It doesn't get better in towns. In towns, the hierarchy is wider, louder, and better dressed. There are Parsi businessmen who speak in English and own textile mills. There are Muslim landlords who read Urdu newspapers and pray behind carved screens. There are Brahmin scholars who walk with their own shade provided by their students. And there's you, walking behind them, moving out of the way, knowing your job is to be silent until addressed and gone before remembered. Sometimes you think, maybe if I learned English, maybe if I shaved differently, maybe if I spoke with just the right mix of obedience and sarcasm, someone would move you up the ladder. Even one rung. But then you remember the man who tried. He learned English. He wore shoes. He cut his hair short. He worked in a colonial office for 9 years. One day, a British officer asked him to shine his boots. When he refused politely, firmly, he was dismissed. The ladder, it turns out, is decorative. You don't climb it. You hold it steady so others can. You learn not to expect dignity, just the absence of direct humiliation. That's your best case scenario. You don't want to be praised, you want to be overlooked. Attention is dangerous. A compliment from a superior means you'll be asked to do more for the same rice. A correction means a lecture. A complaint means a lay fee. And a smile, that just means they're about to explain to you why your poverty is your fault. You look around and realise something terrifying. You've internalised all of it. You bow automatically. You apologise before speaking. You shrink when someone raises their voice, even if it's not directed at you. You call children from rich homes babu, and men younger than you sir. You've memorised your place so thoroughly that sometimes, even when alone, you hesitate to sit on a chair. And when a beggar approaches, ragged, barefoot, toothless, you feel something awful. Not sympathy, relief. Because at least for one fleeting moment, there's someone below you, and you hate yourself for it, but not enough to undo it. Because in colonial India, the hierarchy isn't a ladder, it's a cage. And the worst part? You've learned to decorate it from the inside. There's a system in place. You know it. Everyone does. It's not written down, but you don't need a textbook to feel it. When you walk into a room, you already know where you're allowed to sit. When you speak, you already know which words are too bold. When you stand in line, you know exactly how far behind someone richer, lighter skinned, or better dressed you're supposed to stand. Just far enough to be respectful, but close enough to be useful. It's instinct now. Muscle memory. A performance you've perfected without rehearsal. Humiliation, in colonial India, isn't explosive. It's quiet. Clean. Administrative. You're denied, delayed, dismissed. Always politely. Always unfortunately. Always just on the edge of legality. You approach the tax office. You wait. A clerk, younger than your son, tells you filled a form wrong. You didn't. You filled it just like last time. But this time, they've added a new line, a new requirement, a new stamp. You don't have it. You go back. Try again tomorrow. They're not angry. They're not rude. They're indifferent. And that, somehow, is worse. Because anger you can respond to. Indifference? That swallows you whole. And you're not alone. The entire village swims in this invisible swamp. The old man who bows too deeply too often. The woman who never speaks above a whisper in public. The boy who stands outside the school, staring at the children inside, learning in English, knowing he'll never sit in those desks. It's not just British power. It's caste power. Class power. 1,000-year history of knowing your place, now cross-pollinated with colonial hierarchy and enforced with ink, coins and police boots. If you're from the wrong caste, you can't enter some homes. If you're from the wrong class, you can't speak in some meetings. If you're from the wrong background, your opinion isn't rejected. It simply doesn't register. You're not even incorrect. You're inaudible. You've seen people bow to the Zamindar's horse, not the Zamindar, the horse, because it carries power. And sometimes that's close enough to demand respect. You've watched your father remove his slippers before entering the home of a man who couldn't read but owned 6 fields. You asked why. He didn't answer. He just stared. The kind of stare that carries years of swallowed pride, worn like rust on his face. Even clothing is coded. You wear cotton, stained, simple, mended by your mother's hands and patched with your grandmother's shawl. A bureaucrat walks by in a waistcoat made from imported wool, carrying a cane more decorative than necessary. He looks at you like you're late to a party you weren't invited to. And you are. That's what it feels like. All of life is a banquet you're allowed to smell from outside the tent. Every now and then, someone tosses a crust your way. You catch it without thinking, without blinking. Then you thank them. Not because you're grateful, because you've been taught that gratitude is safer than anger. Even names are part of the system. Your name is long, regional, untranslatable. The British reduce it to a syllable, a vowel, a grunt that can be barked across a tea garden or a barracks. You correct them once, maybe twice. Then you stop. You answer to the mistake. And eventually you forget the correction. You see this happen again and again. People reshaped, renamed, rebranded into something the Empire can use without understanding. There was a man in the next village, a teacher, respected, wise, knew Sanskrit and Urdu, and a bit of Latin from a missionary friend. He tried to organise a reading group, men gathering to read pamphlets, articles, newspapers, banned texts smuggled from Calcutta. It lasted 2 meetings. By the third, a constable arrived, quietly, sat in the back, took notes. By the fourth, the teacher was arrested. They said it was incitement, no trial, no debate, just silence. The next week, his house was raided. His books were burned. His wife cried for 3 days straight. And now? Now. No one says his name out loud. Not because they forgot. Because remembering is dangerous. And you? You stay out of it. You keep your eyes down. You nod when spoken to. You teach your children the same. Don't ask questions, you say. Don't speak back, you warn. Don't dream big, you whisper. You tell them stories of gods who walked barefoot, of kings who served their people, of revolutions in far-off lands. But you never connect those stories to real life. That would be too hopeful. Hope is heavy, and you're already carrying enough. Even joy is rationed. Laughter is safer when it's soft. Celebrations are safer when they're quiet. You dance during festivals, but only in the village, never in front of outsiders. You sing during weddings, but never songs with sharp lyrics. Someone might hear. Someone might misunderstand. Someone might report. You once laughed too loudly near a British patrol. They didn't say anything. They just stared. And the silence after was colder than any punishment. Because that's the game. Constant self-editing. You are always reviewing your tone, your posture, your gaze. Are your hands too loose? Your chin too high? Are you standing too tall for someone of your status? You watch yourself the way they watch you. And sometimes, when no one's around, you still flinch, out of habit. A constable yells in the next lane. You duck, not because he's yelling at you, but because your body assumes it's guilty. That's the thing about living under layered hierarchy. Eventually, you become your own enforcer. You can't remember the first time you were humiliated. It's not a memory. It's a frequency. A low background hum, always there, always vibrating, beneath your breath, beneath your bones, beneath the rusted latches of your father's front door. It starts early. Maybe when you're 5 years old, trying to speak to the postmaster, and he waves you away like a fly. Maybe when you try to drink from a water pot and are told you mustn't. Not because of germs, but because of who you are. Maybe when you see your mother standing in the sun for an hour, waiting for a clerk to hand her a grain chit, only to be told they're not processing requests from her section of town today. There's no incident to point to. It's not one moment. It's the 100 tiny cuts of daily hierarchy, too shallow to kill, too deep to ignore. It's the feeling of being in the room, but not of it. You visit a government office. The waiting area has chairs. Technically, they're for everyone. Realistically, you know better. You stand. The chairs are for men with polished sandals, with satchels full of English words and British habits. You try to ask a question. The clerk gestures to a line you didn't see before. You go there. The man behind that desk says your form is incomplete. You point to the part that's filled out. He sighs. He picks up your form like it's a dead lizard. He tells you to come back tomorrow. You leave. You come back. This time a new clerk, a new rule, a new line. This continues. Not because they're evil, because they can. Because the system is built to let them. You start learning the rhythm. You start dressing a little better before you go. You practice your English. Not to communicate, to disarm. You tell your children to do the same. You want them to survive, which means you want them to perform. Don't speak with your accent. Don't walk like you're tired. Don't sit like you belong. Even religion is ranked now. Your gods are not banned, just backgrounded. You see posters of Christian saints in police stations. You see churches built in districts where temples can't get permits. You see missionaries handing out food and pamphlets in famine zones, feeding with one hand and converting with the other. And your temple, it's allowed, but only if it stays small. Only if it doesn't attract attention. Only if the processions stay quiet and the drumming ends before sunset. You notice what gets rewarded. Cleanliness, deference, Western habits. There's a boy in your town who converted to Christianity. His family disowned him. The British hired him, gave him a job in the post office. He wears a tie now, eats with a fork, says "by Jove" when he's excited. People stare. Some spit when he passes. Some whisper that he betrayed the gods. But others, they wonder, is it worth it? The humiliation of abandoning everything you were in exchange for finally being seen? You don't have the answer. But you've thought about it more than you want to admit. Because you're tired. Tired of bowing when your back already hurts. Tired of speaking softly when the world only hears shouting. Tired of adjusting your posture for men who couldn't carry your life for 5 minutes. You tell yourself you're proud, that you're rooted in your culture. That dignity isn't something given. It's lived. But when a constable slaps your friend for not moving fast enough, and your friend says thank you, you feel something crack, something small, something dangerous. You go home. You sit down. You look at your hands. They're rough, split at the knuckles, calloused from work. They've built houses, dug canals, carried bricks. They've nursed children, braided hair, lit funeral pyres. And yet they tremble in front of a man with a pen. That's the final layer of humiliation. It's not what they do to you. It's what they teach you to do to yourself. You catch yourself apologising for your own name. You joke about your own skin colour. You laugh before they do, to soften the sting. You become a caricature of their expectations, because it's safer than being real. You don't walk anymore. You navigate. Every street, every shop, every silence. A minefield of expectations you didn't create but must constantly tiptoe through. And when someone finally tells you you're different, You're better than the others. You smile, because you've been trained to accept that as a compliment. Even though what they mean is, you make me less uncomfortable than the rest. You teach your children the same. Not because you want to, because you have to, because you know the alternative. You know what happens to children who ask too many questions, laugh too loudly, forget to bow, try to correct the pronunciation of their name. They get noticed, and in this world, being noticed is rarely a good thing. So you tuck their dreams into bedtime stories. You tell them about gods who lifted mountains and kings who disguised themselves as beggars. And you hope, just hope, they never realise that you're doing the same thing. Because in colonial India, your greatest act of rebellion is keeping your head up just long enough to remember who you were before they made you forget. Let's talk about culture. Not the kind that lives in museums, the kind that lives in you. In your rituals, your rhymes, your mother's way of folding cloth, your grandfather's silence before the monsoon. The kind that isn't learned, it's inherited, absorbed, lived. Now let's talk about how that culture is slowly being dissected like a frog on a missionary's desk. See, colonial India doesn't erase your culture with violence. That's too obvious, too loud. It erases with compliments, with curiosity, with condescension disguised as admiration. A British official visits your village during a festival. He watches the drummers, the dancers, the rows of clay lamps. He says it's quaint, colourful, a charming folk display. He writes about it in a letter home, maybe even a travelogue. What he doesn't write is that half the dancers skipped dinner to afford oil for those lamps. That the priest was threatened with arrest last year for refusing to register the temple. That the girl leading the procession is 14, engaged, and missing a week of work she can't afford to miss. Your culture becomes performance, not meaning. And soon you start performing it too. You decorate your home a little extra when the British officer passes through town. You bring out the brighter saris. You rehearse the folk songs. Not for the gods, for the gays. Because it's safer to be exotic than threatening. Safer to be vibrant than visible. Your language suffers the same fate. At home, you speak it freely. To your grandmother. To the goats. To the rain. But in schools, it's English or nothing. English for exams. English for jobs. English for permission to exist beyond subsistence. Your son comes home from the missionary school one day and laughs at your accent. He doesn't mean to. He's just learning. That's what they tell you. He's learning. He learns to conjugate, to declaim Shakespeare, to apologise before interrupting. He learns that please is not just a word, it's a survival tactic. He learns that his grandfather's songs are regional, that his mother's idioms are unsuitable for formal occasions. He learns to translate his identity into something palatable. He comes home with a prize for reciting Wordsworth. He can't recite Kabir, and you don't correct him, because his teacher is British, and you are not. If you're Muslim, Urdu is slowly being edged out of government forms, school syllabi, public notices. If you're Tamil, your script is misprinted in half the books, and no one bothers fixing it. If you're Bengali, your poetry is praised, right before it's banned. Your words survive, but they are suffocated. Your art is studied in Cambridge. Your textiles are exhibited in London. Your cuisine is served at banquets, but only if it's been renamed and sanitised. Dal becomes lentil stew. Biryani becomes spiced rice. Your grandmother's chutney recipe becomes an Anglo-Indian flavour innovation. Your stories are rewritten. Sita becomes a moral anecdote. Krishna becomes a folk archetype. Ashoka becomes a cautionary tale about converting to Buddhism and ruining a good empire. The Ramayana is abridged. The Mahabharata is footnoted. The Vedas are dissected by men who pronounce Sanskrit like it's Latin and tell you what your own scriptures really mean. And you? You nod, politely, gratefully, because questioning the narrative is now a political act. And faith? Faith is watched. You pray, not loudly. You light lamps, not too many. You observe fasts, but don't organise processions. You go to temple, but not during colonial inspections. Because worship is tolerated until it gathers momentum, until it attracts crowds, until it becomes noise. Then it becomes a security risk. Church bells ring freely. Temple bells must not disturb the collector's sleep. You've seen this. A police officer once stopped a curtain in your street, said the noise was disrupting public peace. Public, in this case, meaning one retired British officer with a sore tooth. You stopped singing. No one protested. The priest nodded and said, "We'll continue in silence." And you did, because your faith is not about rebellion, it's about endurance. You whisper mantras with the same tone you use to count coins, quietly, cautiously, like you're not sure what's still allowed. Your gods adapt, they always have. They shrink from stone to metal, from temple to locket, from procession to memory. They go portable, like survival. And when the census comes, you tick the box they expect you to. You never say you're questioning. You never say you're mixing. You never say your actual beliefs lie somewhere between myth and modernity, held together with hope and repetition. The census doesn't have a column for ambiguity, only categories you fit yourself in, not because you believe it, because you need to. Because belief in colonial India is not what saves you. It's what you're watched through. There's a church in your town, a tall one, stone and symmetrical, with stained glass that glows at dusk like a holy warning. It sits near the collector's office, just far enough to keep its distance from the marketplace, but close enough to remind everyone where the line is. It was built by the missionaries, not with violence, with charm, with education, with biscuits. The same missionaries who run the school your nephew attends. A Christian school, English medium. Tucked between the post office and a banyan tree that once shaded a Sufi shrine, until that was quietly removed to make room for the new reading hall. You sent your nephew there because you want him to survive. Not thrive, just survive. Because in colonial India, education isn't a ladder, it's a filter. You pass through it one layer at a time, slowly shedding your language, your customs, your accent, until one day you look up from your desk and realise you speak in a borrowed voice. And the borrowed voice doesn't pronounce your grandmother's name correctly. At school, your nephew learns to write essays on Queen Victoria and the greatness of the railways. He recites the white man's burden without irony. He wears a uniform so clean it looks like it's never known dirt. And it hasn't, because his mother washes it every night, scrubbing out the red clay that creeps in from the alley like ancestral memory. They teach him that his gods are mythology, that his mother tongue is insufficient for scientific instruction, that good boys stand straight, speak slowly, and don't interrupt the reverend when he's explaining why moral hygiene starts with punctuality and a proper tie knot. There's a boy in his class, Pintu, brilliant in Sanskrit, wrote poetry in Hindi, laughed at everything. One day he asked why Jesus didn't look like any of them. Asked why Indian gods had to be called idols, while British kings got bronze statues. He was expelled the next day. Disrespect, they said. No discussion. No debate. Just gone. Now even the laughter in the classroom is cautious. Every child learns early. Questioning is not education. It's sedition with spelling. Your nephew stops asking about his grandmother's stories. He starts saying thank you before he means it. He doesn't touch his grandfather's feet anymore. Not because he's ungrateful, but because his teacher said these customs are primitive. The teacher is well-meaning. He speaks softly, uses handkerchiefs, says my dear boy with the warmth of someone who has never known poverty. But when he talks about India, it's as if he's describing a dusty attic. A land of potential, he says, which is code for not good enough yet, which is code for be like us, which is code for stop being you. And you know this because you went through the same. Different decade, same story. You were taught to clap when the Queen's birthday was announced, to stand for God Save the King, to memorise dates that meant nothing to you. Hastings, Clive, 1857, 1858, 1876. You were told that history began with their arrival. Everything before that? Legend. Everything after? Gratitude. And you believed it. Not because it made sense. Because it made things easier. You learned to nod. To say, yes sir. To pretend that progress looked like them. Because they made the rules. They still do. And culture? Culture is fine, as long as it behaves. They'll let you keep your clothes, so long as you wear them at home. They'll let you sing your songs, so long as you don't sing them in protest. They'll let you paint your gods, so long as your gods don't contradict the imperial portrait of you. Colourful, passive, compliant. You've seen how fast that mask falls. Remember when a poet in Bengal wrote a play that mocked the British? It was banned. Remember when a group of weavers wrote satirical couplets about the decline of Indian industry? Their town was raided. Remember when someone painted a goddess holding a broken chain instead of a flower? They were arrested for inciting unrest. You can be spiritual, not political. You can be artistic, not critical. You can be traditional, as long as it doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. And if you step out of line, they'll remind you that culture is not a right. It's a privilege, granted by them, revoked at will. There's a rumour in town. They say the British are building a museum. Not in your village, of course. In the city. Marble columns, iron gates, a fountain that only works when the collector's niece visits. It's going to house native antiquities. That's what the sign says. Preservation of Indian culture. Which is strange, because your culture doesn't feel preserved. It feels archived. The museum will hold statues, coins, weapons, scrolls, things taken from temples, from battlefields, from forgotten forts, labelled, catalogued and placed behind glass. You heard they're displaying a Nataraja from Tamil Nadu. You used to pray to one just like it. Now it's art. You can visit, for a fee. You pay to look at what used to belong to you. No shoes allowed, no touching, no chanting, only observation. Silent, reverent, supervised. Culture now is a diorama. No longer lived, just viewed. And you wonder, if they've taken your gods, your stories, your colours, your songs, your language, what's left? The answer, you. You're left. But even that is conditional. You've been reduced to a type, an aesthetic, an entry in an ethnographic study titled The Primitive Tribes of India and Their Peculiar Customs. Your rituals are fascinating. Your weddings are elaborate. Your food is spicy. Your attire is exotic. Your festivals are riotous but charming. They film you during Holi. They photograph you during Durga Puja. They write about your colourful resilience in times of famine. You read the article. It mentions your village. Misspells the name. Misses the point. Says nothing about the debt, or the drought, or the little boy who died last week because his mother couldn't get quinine. But it praises your community spirit. You show the article to your uncle. He reads it in silence, then uses it to roll his bidi. You say nothing, because he's right. Because there's no rebellion in recognition if it's rooted in misrepresentation. You've seen British officers attend your pujas with their wives. They smile, they watch, they say, "What a beautiful tradition." But they never ask why you fast. They never ask why the goddess has 10 arms. They never ask why the drummers keep playing even when it rains. Because to them, you are decorative, not devotional. Even your resistance gets rebranded. Remember the revolt? The one your grandfather spoke of? The one where locals rose up against an unfair land tax, burned ledgers, refused to grow indigo? It's in the history books now, but not as a rebellion, as a local disturbance quelled by prompt military action. There's a picture, not of the protest, of the officer who ended it, smiling, sword at his side, foot on the same ground where your cousin was buried without a name. You've tried writing letters to the papers, to the courts, to the officials, but English isn't just a language anymore, it's a filter. Your anger doesn't translate, your metaphors fall flat, your pleas sound emotional. And emotion, to them, is the opposite of reason. They correct your grammar before they consider your point. And when you speak in your own tongue, they call it uninformed passion. Even truth sounds wrong if spoken in the wrong accent. So you learn to say less, to wait longer, to bow deeper. Culture, in colonial India, is not what binds you, it's what brands you. A tag, a category, a permit to exist so long as you smile on cue and don't ask for the drum back. You're not forbidden from being Indian, you're just forbidden from deciding what that means. That definition belongs to someone else now. To the man with the notebook, the man with the rifle, the man with the vote you'll never cast. You wake up on a festival day. The air smells like ghee, hibiscus, and soot. Somewhere a conch shell blares. You watch your daughter draw rangoli on the mud floor. She hums an old song, the one your mother used to sing when she ground spices and prayed for rain. And in that moment, you feel something unpermitted. Joy. You almost stop her. You almost say, "Not so loud, not near the gate. Wait until the inspector passes." But you don't. You let her sing. Because even if your culture is censored, even if your faith is footnoted, even if your gods are boxed up and stored beneath the shadow of a foreign crown, you're still here. And that's something. It's not rebellion. It's not victory. But it's something. Because belief isn't always about gods. Sometimes it's just refusing to be rewritten. Let's talk about horror. Not the kind with ghosts, the kind with forms. Ink, seals, rubber stamps, signatures that change your life without ever touching your skin. There's a famine in your district. You know this because your neighbour died in the night, face down in an empty grain sack. You know this because your child has stopped asking for seconds. You know this because your stomach stopped growling and started whispering, "This is the new normal." But the British report says, famine conditions not yet confirmed. Because according to the regulation, famine isn't real until a bureaucrat sees a specific number of bodies stacked in a specific way. Until then, it's nutritional distress. You watch people chew boiled leaves. You watch them eat mud with salt. You watch them die slowly, apologetically, like their starvation is an inconvenience to empire paperwork. A British officer visits. He's wearing linen. He stands under an umbrella held by a man whose ribs look like ladder rungs. The officer says, "We are deeply concerned." He then writes a report that blames local superstition, laziness and overpopulation. Not the grain exports, not the forced indigo farming. Not the fact that trains are shipping rice out of your village to feed London's demand while your cousin is eating ash because it feels full. You think maybe they just don't understand. Until you realise they do. They've just chosen a version of understanding where you're always the cause of your own suffering. It's cleaner that way, easier to manage the guilt. Because horror in colonial India isn't accidental, it's scheduled. It arrives on time, carried in ledgers and rule books. Let's talk about the salt tax. You live near the sea. You can see it from your roof, but you're not allowed to collect its salt. That salt belongs to the British. So you must buy it, salt, from a government depot that's 15 miles away, overpriced and heavily guarded. If you try to make your own, they fine you. If you keep trying, they jail you. You tell your son this. He laughs. Not because it's funny, because it sounds like something from a broken storybook. Imagine that. Paying for what the earth gives freely. Being punished for touching the ocean. The British say the tax is necessary for administrative continuity. You say, "My grandmother didn't need permission to dry seawater." They say, that's exactly the problem. There's a man in a neighbouring village who tried to rebel. Not with violence, with logic. He made his own salt, openly, on purpose. They dragged him away in front of his children. Said he was inciting unrest. Said he was undermining the legal basis of salt commerce. He served 3 months. Came back thinner. Quieter. Never touched salt again. That's how horror works here. Not through explosions, through policies and absurdity. That's its favourite tool. You work in a cotton field. You grow cotton. You don't wear cotton. Because all the cotton goes to Manchester. It's shipped out, spun into thread, turned into clothes, and shipped back to you. More expensive, less durable, and stamped with a label that says, improved. You try to buy it. It costs a week's wages. So you wear homespun. Until they call it subversive. Because your clothes are now political. Not because of what they are, but because of where they didn't come from. One day, an officer stops you. He says you must pay tax for the land. You say the harvest failed. He says the record doesn't show that. You say we ate grass this month. He says that's not a recognised unit of economic measurement. You laugh. He doesn't. He hands you a fine for laughing at a government official. You pay it. With the coins you were saving for your daughter's dowry, then you laugh again. Because what else is left? Let's talk about law. There's a rule, section 124A. Sedition. What does it mean? It means, if you speak against the government, you're a criminal. Not if you attack. Not if you steal. Just if you speak. If you write. If you sing. If you publish a pamphlet that says something unflattering about the Crown. The law says any act that brings hatred or contempt toward the British government. That's all. Hatred, contempt, disrespect. You ask, who decides what counts? They say the judge will decide. The judge is British, so you stay quiet. Even your silence starts to sound seditious. There's a poet in Calcutta, wrote a line about lions in chains. No names, no accusations. He's arrested. The officer says, "You know what you meant," and that's enough. Horror here is proactive. It punishes what might happen, what could be said, what feels dangerous. Even dreams become contraband. You sleep carefully. There's a man you know who filed a petition, just a petition, asking for the right to access clean water in his village. He was labelled a potential agitator. His house was searched. They found nothing. They searched again anyway, said, he's hiding something. He was. Hope. And that's the most dangerous thing of all. There's a man in your village who laughs all day. Not a madman. Not at first. Just someone who used to be a clerk. He kept ledgers, carried stamps, corrected the grammar in tax forms. Until one day, he got fined for misfiling a document he never received. He tried to explain. The officer said, ignorance is not an excuse. He paid the fine, then got fined again the next week. Same issue, same missing form, same shrug. He paid that too. The third time, he didn't speak. He just laughed. And he never stopped. Now he walks around the village with a dried ink bottle around his neck and a sheaf of blank papers under his arm. Sometimes he yells, "Approved!" at random people. Sometimes he hands out imaginary fines to buffaloes. You watch him and think, maybe he broke, or maybe he broke through. Because if you take this system seriously, it will devour you. If you take it as a joke, you might at least die laughing. Let's talk about inspections. You're a weaver. You spin thread from dusk till dawn. One day, a British official shows up unannounced. He wants to inspect your setup, not your thread, not your technique, your posture. He says, native weaving methods are inefficient due to improper spinal alignment. You blink. He gestures to your stool, the one your father used, your grandfather built, your great-grandfather carved from a mango tree during a thunderstorm. Too short, he says. Causes fatigue, must be corrected. You nod. Because what else do you do when a man with shiny boots and a fountain pen tells you your spine is the reason India isn't modern yet? He leaves. You go back to weaving, but now you feel it. A phantom discomfort. Not in your spine, in your pride. Let's talk about bureaucracy. You want to build a well in your village. There's no central water source. The kids walk 2 miles. Your uncle slipped and broke his hip trying to carry a pot uphill during monsoon season. So you collect money, you plan it out, you file for permission. The government says, submit Form 3B in triplicate, along with a certified topographic survey and a bribe. They don't say bribe, they say processing donation. You pay it. They lose the form. You submit it again. They say the location is too close to a colonial supply route. You say the supply route is a cow path with 3 rocks. They say security concerns. You say children are drinking drainage water. They say have patience. You wait. Someone dies of cholera. You file a complaint. They say, so you admit you proceeded with unapproved water access. Now you're under investigation. You decide not to build the well. It's easier to dig a grave. Let's talk about wildlife. A tiger has been killing goats in your village. You ask the district forest officer for help. He sends a telegram. Tigers are protected under the Wildlife Preservation Act of 1887. You say, so are goats. No reply. A week later, you catch the tiger. You don't kill it. You trap it in a pit. You inform the authorities. A British officer arrives and says, you're under arrest for illegal trapping of a royal species. You say, what should we have done? He says, wait for official instructions. You say, when would those arrive? He says, you'd be informed. You say, after how many goats? After how many children? He shrugs. The tiger is released. You are fined. The officer is promoted. You're not sure who the predator is anymore. Let's talk about medicine. You fall ill. Fever, sweating, delirium. The local Vaidya gives you herbs. You improve a little. Then worse again. You go to the government clinic. A nurse, British trained, badge polished, voice crisp, looks at your chart and says, "This illness isn't listed in the Colonial register. We can't confirm treatment." You say, "I have chills. I can't eat. I'm coughing blood." She says, "That could be hysteria, or dehydration, or psychological unrest due to socio-economic pressure." You say, "Can I lie down?" She says, "We're out of beds. Also, you smell of mustard oil." You say, "I live in a house with a fire pit. That's what we have." She recommends prayer and asks you to leave before the medical inspector arrives. You walk home. You pass out halfway. You wake up 3 days later. Still alive. Still confused. You hear that the nurse received an award for Rural Health Service Excellence. You cough. It tastes like dust and irony. Let's talk about school. Your child writes with their left hand. The teacher says, "That's improper." You ask why. The teacher says, "Because it is." You ask again. He says, "It's a sign of degeneracy." You say, "My child writes better than any other student." He says, "It's about discipline." Your child is beaten until they switch hands. They stutter for 6 weeks. When they finally speak again, they say, "I'm sorry I embarrassed you." You hold them. You say nothing. Because how do you explain to a child that absurdity doesn't need a reason? It just needs power. Let's talk about death. A man dies in the next village, old, quiet, alone, old. His neighbour goes to the local registrar to report it. The registrar says, "We can't process the death until we confirm his caste." The neighbour says, "He was a carpenter." The registrar says, "Occupation is not identity." The neighbour says, "He was also a good man." The registrar says, "That's not relevant. The body lies in limbo, no certificate, no closure." Eventually, the village cremates him without paperwork. 2 months later, the registrar issues a fine for unrecorded death. Horror, absurdity, 2 sides of the same colonial coin, flipped daily, always landing on you. Let's talk about numbers. The British love numbers. They count everything. How many tons of grain were exported this year? How many new miles of railway track were laid? How many native subjects passed their English literacy exam? How many officials received promotions for reducing cholera outbreaks, even when the cholera wasn't reduced, only renamed? They have thick files, red-stitched ledgers, quarterly reports, charts with tidy columns and bar graphs that suggest things are improving. You read one once. It said your region had experienced minimal distress during the last famine cycle. You read it while helping carry your neighbour's emaciated body to a pyre made of termite-bitten wood, because no one had the strength to go deeper into the forest to collect more. The report said minimal. The ashes said otherwise, but the ashes didn't make it into the spreadsheet. Let's talk about justice. There's a court in your district, a square room, a white man at the front, a few brown men sitting stiffly around him, pens poised like bayonets. Your cousin was summoned there last year, accused of stealing grain from a colonial storehouse. He didn't steal it, he worked there. He just didn't bribe the constable fast enough. So they found grain in his hut. A trial followed. No lawyer, no translator, just your cousin sweating under a ceiling fan that only worked when someone remembered to pump the generator. He tried to speak. They cut him off. The British judge said, "The evidence speaks for itself." The evidence was a bag of grain he'd been rationing for his pregnant wife. He was sentenced to 6 months' labour on a tea plantation. The plantation was owned by the brother-in-law of the district magistrate, so technically it all stayed in the family. You want to believe in justice, but then you remember the boy who threw a rock at a passing Colonial cart. It didn't hit anyone, it wasn't even aimed. He was sentenced to 2 years, the report said, intent to incite public disorder. The boy was 8. Let's talk about pride, not the loud kind, the kind that wakes up with you. You once painted your front door blue, not just any blue, that blue, the one your grandfather used to call rain colour, the one that shimmered when the light hit it just right, like the sky was holding its breath. You spent 2 days mixing the dye, used rice starch, boiled flower petals, painted it carefully. It looked beautiful. Until a British officer passed through your street and asked why a native dwelling was painted in royal tones. He said it was too vivid, unregulated, distracting. He ordered it repainted with approved village tones. You complied. Now your door is brown, the same brown as the dust, the same brown as the silence. Let's talk about letters. Your uncle once wrote one to the district collector. A simple request. Fix the broken bridge between 2 villages. People were falling. Livestock was drowning. The collector never read it. The clerk misplaced it. Your uncle wrote again. This time he received a reply. The reply wasn't about the bridge. It was a warning about unauthorised communication with district authorities. He was told he needed permission to file complaints, so he stopped writing. Now, when someone falls into the river, you build a raft. And keep your thoughts to yourself. Let's talk about logic. Once, you watched a man get fined for loitering. He wasn't loitering. He was waiting for his wife to finish at the ration line. You asked the constable why he was being fined. The constable said he wasn't moving. You asked, what if he had been walking in circles? The constable said, then we'd fine him for suspicious pacing. You laughed. The constable didn't. Now you don't ask questions in public. Let's talk about the census. They came to your village, asked questions. How many people live in your hut? What's your religion? What's your caste? How many goats? How many children? Can they read? What language do you speak at home? What language do you prefer? What language would you prefer if the empire were to standardise education across provinces? You said, we speak Bhojpuri. They wrote down Hindi. You said, we worship Shiva. They wrote down Hindu. You said, my child read palm leaf scrolls. They wrote down illiterate. You watched as your life was flattened into categories that made no sense, but made perfect sense to them. Because categories are easier to rule than people. Let's talk about memory. You remember the fort on the hill? Your father told you it was once ruled by a local king. Your grandfather told you it housed a court of poets, dancers, philosophers. The new tourist sign says it was liberated from misrule by the British expedition of 1803. The inside has been turned into a guest house. They painted over the murals. The court hall is now a billiard room. They kept the stone plaque outside though. It reads, for the civilizing mission. Let's talk about madness. Real madness. Not the kind with yelling and broken pots. The quiet kind. The woman who stopped speaking after her son was taken away for refusing to work at the plantation. The man who smiles all day because he once spent 2 weeks in jail for walking too close to a telegraph pole. The boy who doesn't cry anymore because it wastes water. The girl who sings lullabies to her doll, even though she hasn't eaten in 2 days, because rhythm is the only thing left that makes sense. It's not hysteria. It's not fragility. It's adaptation. Because if the world keeps making less sense every day, then the only rational response is to stop trying to make sense of it. You don't pray for understanding anymore. You pray for numbness. And on good days, you achieve it. It doesn't happen in a moment. Not like in stories. No lightning bolt, no breakdown, no scream echoing into the night. It happens slowly, quietly. You wake up one morning and something feels lighter, but not in a good way. Like a part of you was stolen in the night and you're too tired to look for it. You get dressed, same clothes, same routine, but it feels like you're doing it for someone else. Your hands are still moving, but your thoughts aren't following. It's not sadness. It's not even anger. It's emptiness. The kind you can't explain to anyone because you don't want them to feel it too. You walk to the field. You pass the same man begging on the road. You used to feel pity. Now you just feel nothing. Like your heart grew calluses. You get to work, pull weeds, tie bundles, move stones. Everything functions. But nothing feels real. You stop thinking in full sentences. You stop looking at the sky. Because the sky used to mean something. A symbol. A metaphor. A place to send prayers. Now it's just weather. And even that is unpredictable. Your child shows you something. A leaf shaped like a heart. A drawing in the mud. A rock that sparkles in sunlight. You smile, you say, that's nice. But you don't feel it. Because feeling requires energy. And you're saving yours to survive the next humiliation. The next argument over rations. The next bribe. The next official who decides today is the day your roof needs a permit. The next storm that knocks down a tree and takes a goat with it. There's always a next, and you're always already behind. So you live smaller. You fold your dreams into matchbox-sized thoughts. You think, maybe if I just get through this week. Maybe if I can just keep the lantern lit. Maybe if I can make the rice stretch to Friday. You used to want change. Now you just want quiet, not silence. Silence can be dangerous, but quiet. The kind where no one calls your name with bad news. Where your child sleeps through the night. Where the roof doesn't leak. Where the constable walks past your home without stopping. You start to notice things you never did before. The sound of your own breath when the village is asleep. The pattern of dirt under your fingernails. The exact weight of a single rupee coin in your hand. And how long it takes to earn. You count the cracks in the wall and name them. Not out of boredom, out of habit, because control, even over cracks, feels like something. You remember when your brother talked about going to Calcutta, getting a job in the railways, learning telegraphy, writing articles. He went. He came back 4 years later, older, quieter, with a limp he won't talk about, and a scar near his ribs that he blames on bad luck. You asked what happened. He said, I tried to speak English too well. You never asked again. You stopped dreaming about Calcutta, or Bombay, or anything that starts with the idea that you can move and still be yourself. You keep your eyes low, your voice lower. You teach your child to nod before asking anything, to eat what's on the plate, even if it's cold, stale, or half a meal. You tell them, this is how things are. They ask, will it always be like this? And you lie. You say, no. because you want them to sleep. And deep down, you still want to believe it too. You meet people who are worse off, and you feel relief. Then guilt for the relief, then numbness again. A cycle. You used to laugh easily. Now laughter feels like a luxury you can't afford. Like using too much oil in the lamp, knowing it has to last a month. You've learned the art of surviving the day without remembering it. You blink, and it's already evening. You sit in the doorway, watch the smoke curl up from the stove. It's the only poetry you have left. The only thing that moves without permission. You stare at it like it owes you answers. It gives you silence. And for once, you accept it. You used to believe love was loud, that it meant declarations, protection, grand promises under banyan trees and monsoon skies, that it showed up with mangoes, with laughter, with borrowed bangles and stolen glances at the riverbank. But under empire, love becomes quieter. It becomes work. It becomes standing in line for 2 hours just to bring back 1 tin of kerosene for your wife's stove. It becomes keeping your son from mouthing off to the constable, even when you know the constable deserves it. It becomes hiding your daughter's books the night before the district officer visits, because the last girl who showed she could read was called too forward and sent to another village to marry a man twice her age. It becomes silence at the right time, bending before you're asked, smiling when your child lies and says they're full, even though you know they're not. Love, here, is restraint. Not because you want to be distant, but because every day teaches you that joy is taxable, that visibility is dangerous, that even a little boldness can bring the roof down. So you hold your family tight, not in your arms, that would draw attention, in your actions. You stay, you endure, you fetch water. You give the last bite of food to the youngest. You pay the debt. Even when you didn't borrow anything. That's what love becomes. Repayment for things you never asked for. Inherited from people who were also just surviving. There's a fatigue that doesn't sit in your limbs. It lives in your breath. You feel it when you hear a bell ring and instinctively check if it's time to stop working. Not because you want rest, but because you don't want to be caught working too long without permission. You feel it when your child asks what your childhood was like, and you pause, because most of it is too bare to describe without sounding ungrateful for having survived it. You feel it when the postman walks by and doesn't hand you anything, and a small stupid part of you is relieved, because news is rarely good. You remember when letters were love. Now they're mostly summons. There's a man in the next town who received a letter saying his land was being reclassified. He didn't understand it. He asked a clerk. The clerk said, "Oh, it means it's no longer yours." The man laughed. The clerk didn't. He was told to vacate in 30 days. His grandfather was buried under that land. He left anyway. Now he lives in a hut by the riverbank and sells dried fish to people who don't look him in the eye. No one asks him about his past, because the past is dangerous. It's a reminder of what was taken. So you learn to stay in the present, not by choice, by exhaustion. You start calling survival a blessing, even when it feels like slow punishment. You say things like, "At least it's not raining today. At least the constable didn't stop me. At least they didn't take all the grain." And these at leasts stack up, one on top of another, until you realise your whole life is built on lowered expectations and careful optimism. You hear about uprisings in other parts of the country. Men throwing pamphlets, women going to jail for protests, students shouting slogans, and you think, maybe things are changing. Then you remember what happens to people who believe that. There was a man in your village, bright, fierce. Read newspapers out loud to old men who couldn't see and to children who couldn't read. He started asking questions. Why can't we decide our own tax? Why do we send grain away when people are starving? Why does the judge's dog have better medical care than our mothers? One night he disappeared. No knock, no shouting, just silence. Next day a soldier walked by, said it was a transfer. A week later, his house was burned down. His mother said, maybe it was an accident. You didn't argue. You just started reading your own papers quietly, and never out loud. You pass his old house sometimes. The door is gone. The floor is cracked. There's a hibiscus plant growing where his sister used to sit and grind spices. It blooms once a year. Nobody touches it. You used to think collapse would feel like noise. Turns out, it feels like a sigh. Like forgetting what you meant to do in the middle of doing it. Like hearing a voice and not turning to look. Like dreaming in black and white, because colour is too expensive, and grief takes energy you no longer have. You don't know when it started. Maybe the day your father gave up shaving because the mirror cracked and he said, "What's the point?" Maybe when your mother forgot her own song, the one she used to hum while cutting vegetables, and no one noticed until the silence started humming back. Or maybe it started with you. The day you stopped running to the river, even when the sky burned orange and the water caught fire with sunset. You used to chase colour. Now you avoid it. It draws attention. Even your dreams feel beige, faded, worn thin by repetition. Every night you dream the same thing. A line, a desk, a man with a hat. You're always missing a one form, one word, one reason. You wake up feeling like you failed something. You did. You failed to disappear enough. You kept trying to exist. And in this system, that's the first mistake. You used to want more. Now you want less. Less inspection, less noise. Less waiting in heat that peels your skin like an apology you didn't mean. Some days, your thoughts wander back to a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore. The boy who ran through monsoon puddles like they were oceans. The girl who sang in courtyards loud enough to wake the neighbour's cow. The man who believed the British didn't know what they were doing. You're not them anymore, but they visit sometimes, in flashes, when the wind shifts just right, when a smell drifts in, jasmine, earth, burnt sugar, and something behind your ribs stirs, like it remembers how it felt to be alive. Not functional, not efficient, alive. And then it passes. Back to the tasks. There's always a task. Even breathing feels like one now. There's a phrase you used to say, "Chalo, kuch to kia." At least something was done. Now you say it after surviving the day, even if that something was just not crying during the walk to the well. Not flinching when the landlord yelled, not screaming when the school raised the fees again, and your child came home with dust in their hair and defeat in their voice. You tell them they're doing great. You tell them to dream. And they do. They dream of offices, of trains, of books with crisp white pages and no dirt in the margins. They dream of a version of India that's theirs. You want to believe with them? You do. But you've lived long enough to know how dreams are taxed. Still, when they fall asleep beside you, small, tired, soft-cheeked, you hold their hand like it's your only real possession. You don't say it, but in that grip lives every prayer you never learned the words for. Please let them survive. Please let them keep a part of themselves. Please don't make them shrink like we did. The next morning, you wake before the sun. The house is still. The walls don't complain. The air smells like thyme and smoke. You sit by the door. You think about the absurdity of this empire. The railways that take you nowhere. The papers that mean nothing. The language that praises your obedience and fears your imagination. You think about the softness you once had, and how you folded it away so neatly, like winter clothes you knew you'd never wear again. But here's the thing. Even numbness cracks. Even the most exhausted hearts remember warmth. Even the poorest child will draw gods in the mud with a stick. Even the most broken mother will sing lullabies to an empty room. And even the colonized, crushed, categorized, corrected, inspected, instructed, indebted, and ignored still breathe, still wake, still wait for something. You don't know what. Maybe nothing. But breath is still breath, and silence, even this heavy, smothered kind, has an echo. You've started listening to it, not because you think salvation is coming, but because after everything, you're still here, and that's not weakness. That's resistance. The slow, quiet, unphotographed kind. The kind that doesn't get mentioned in reports, but keeps the gods company while no one is looking. The night is still, the kind of still that feels earned. Crickets buzz like tired historians. The breeze moves like memory, soft, confused, late. You lie on your mat, back aching, eyes dry, mind buzzing with images that don't form stories anymore, just flashes. A tax receipt, a grain sack, a child's drawing, a goat that never came back. Your father's silence. A single cracked tile above the stove that catches moonlight just right. You feel your own pulse, not in your wrist, in your teeth. And for a second, you wonder if maybe you are the story. Not the hero, not the villain. Just the part everyone skips over. The person carrying water between scenes. The face in the background of someone else's painting. Still here. Still breathing. Still waiting for the next bell to ring. The next shoe to drop. The next piece of paper to tell you where you belong. But for now, there's only the night, and the hum, and your breath, and nothing else. Just quiet, just drift, just